Russian officials have just brokered a ceasefire deal between rebel forces in Syria and the Assad regime. The perhaps temporary end to hostilities in the area comes just a few weeks after intense fighting broke out in the southern Daraa region, where hundreds of thousands of Syrian civilians fled their homes. But now, under the terms of the Russia-mediated agreement, those people have started to return. The only question here in Israel is, what effect, if any, will this deal have here? Returning to the studio with more on this is Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Dr. Sherman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, obvious question, what is going to be the impact here in Israel?
Well, you know, I think only the foolish would predict what's going to happen in Syria. I remind viewers that in 2012, Ehud Barak predicted that Assad would fall within a matter of weeks. And we saw how that worked out.
Right, obviously not the case.
But I believe that the ceasefire will hold for a limited amount of time and then collapse. I think the potential for unexpected consequences here is so great that it would be very dangerous to base any policy on benign assumptions. I think Israel has to perhaps hope for the best, but certainly plan for the worst. And I really think that this could be an epicenter of conflict between Israel and people across the border.
Sure, but let's say short term. Let's say short term this hold. Let's say a month. What is the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, going to look like between Israel and Syria in the southern border?
Well, I'm not sure there are going to be any tectonic changes, but I certainly think what goes beyond that is what's worrying. I would be very skeptical in believing that Iran has relinquished its ambitions to take over Syria. I think we can expect at least covert attempts by Iran to introduce forces there. And I think Israel has to be both alert and resolute in its response as to any infringements as to the buffer zone.
Right. Well, I think Russia has already been pretty clear that the idea of Iran totally leaving Syria completely is most likely out of the question, although I think that the plan will be to keep Iranian forces out of at least the buffer zone in southern Syria. At least that's my understanding for now.
That may be true, but you know, the question is, if there is a massive Iranian presence in other parts of Syria, how realistic is it to think that they will not infiltrate under one guise or other into this area?
Right.
So I think that there's very little room for optimism in the future.
Well, there's a lot to look out for. Dr. Sherman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course.